Me too. Hold on.
Well, hello.
Hey there.
Hey, welcome back to the studio.
To my kitchen table. And your
My
kitchen table.
I've moved. Yes, I've moved since the last time. I'm just trying out different spots in the house. If you're wondering why we're talking about where we're sitting and you forgot, we're now on YouTube. So if you want to see our beautiful faces, check out our YouTube page, which is now up.
And if you don't want to see our faces, you can see our sick new intro video by Roy Cunningham.
Yeah, I would go to YouTube just for that. Not for our faces, because I'm with you. I'd rather just listen to our voice.
Correct.
But definitely a cool video. So thank you to Roy for the awesome artwork.
Yes.
And thank you for joining me today.
Well, it is a delight. I feel like we are just sitting across from each other on the table, but you can't see my pores. So it's really the best of both worlds.
I can't see your what?
Pores.
Oh, pores. Don't worry, I can see them. This is in 4K.
Now can all 5 of our viewers on YouTube as well.
Yes, exactly. No, I can't see your pores, but I can see that you're glowing.
Oh, is it the Rhode Beauty products that I've been using?
It is probably the Rhode Beauty products. Shout out to our girl Hailey Bieber. We love your stuff. It might also be what they call a baby glow.
Do they call it that?
A baby. So, surprise for those of you who don't know, there are 3 people on this podcast now. Myself, Riley, and the future baby Catenacci.
Yes. We have an heir. No spare yet, but we are working on it.
We don't know if it's and there's some applause, just so you know.
Oh, thank you.
Cheering.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We don't know if it's a boy or girl, so we don't know if it'll take the throne or not, or if there's gonna have to be a fight.
Well, you know what, Stephanie, we don't.
Can you?
Yeah, we can put a girl on the throne. If Kate Middleton would do it.
How progressive.
And we could do
it.
They
made that rule, and then they had like a bunch of boys, so it didn't even matter.
They had one boy, and then they had a girl.
And then another boy.
And then another boy.
Just in case.
You know what? Speaking of the royals and pregnancy news, I'm so tired of everyone saying that Kate and Meghan are pregnant all the time.
Are they still saying that?
Yeah, people just keep... Every time I go to the grocery store, another pregnancy rumor. Do I think it's weird that Meghan Markle chose to wear a full fall coat in August in LA when it was 75 degrees out? Yeah, I think it's weird. But I also don't think she's pregnant.
But maybe she's just a fall girly like me, and can't wait to get that fall wardrobe out.
So true. Fall is a mindset. I did not wait until the fall equinox. Okay, people. As soon as I wanted a chai latte, we kicked it TF off.
Well, first of all, chai lattes are for year round. I had the chai pumpkin latte. Don't do it.
Okay.
It was basically just a cup. Oh, it was pumpkin latte. It was a cup of whipped cream and not chai or pumpkin, and probably 4,000 calories. So
at least.
Yes. But the last thing I'll say about Kate and Meghan is Kate's definitely not having any more kids. I mean, I don't know her personally, but she's had some pretty rough pregnancies. So
yeah, honestly, I did not have morning sickness, but I thought of her every
brag
day.
About it.
I was like, if I did, I would not be doing this again. If I was in bed.
And again.
Yeah. No thanks.
So I think they're good on that. But today we're not talking about the British royals. surprisingly. We are talking about Russians.
Which
we're headed to Russia.
Kind of our second favorite. Wait, can we talk really quick about the TikTok meme about the Roman Empire effect?
Oh, yes, we can, even though that's Rome and not Russia. But
no, but I'm bringing it to the Romanovs because of the we retweeted it from our account. But
yeah,
so there's this thing where you ask, your boyfriend or your husband or any male in your life, like, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And shockingly, men think about this a lot.
I
weekly.
couldn't tell if it was real.
I can't either, but I think it is real, at least some of them. And someone said that the girl version of that is the Romanovs, which I think is 100% true. And I'm thinking about Rasputin 8 times a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the comparison, then I might have to agree with this trend. But I also have to say that I might think about the Roman Empire a lot too, but that's just because I'm a history nerd.
You do too, yeah. Thomas, my husband, and our alleged producer, he said he does not think about the Roman Empire pretty much at all.
Which is surprising, actually, to me, just in his line of work. And I don't know.
Yeah, I was surprised as well. So I asked what his version of the Roman Empire was, and he said it was the Minnesota Vikings winning in the playoffs in 2018 or 2019? Yeah, he thinks about that a lot. But I was like, you seem like the type of person, no offense, who thinks about the hanging chads in the 2000 election a lot. That's what I would think is going on in his mind at all times. Yeah.
What a neat guy.
Doesn't he sound fun?
Fun. Sign me up. We're going
to he's not thinking about the hanging chads. So interesting.
I hope that our listeners know what a hanging chad is. Otherwise, this could get awkward. So if you don't, just look it up.
I don't have time to explain Al Gore to these people. So feel free to look at Wikipedia.
It's a different podcast altogether. We're talking about Russia. Okay?
Russia, yes.
Everyone's favorite country at this moment. No politics about Russia.
Just universally beloved.
Just universally beloved. There's no sides here. No, but really we're talking about ancient Russia. We're going back to the 16th century. So hopefully we're not going to be offending either side here, because this is history, people. We're talking about history. To understand what's going on today, you have to understand where we came from. And where we came from is hundreds of years ago in Russia. So buckle up.
Would you say that our subject today has one of the best I don't know if it's the best nickname, but one of the most famous nicknames in history?
Yes, I would definitely say the most famous, the most infamous, if you will. Yes, we are talking about Ivan IV, also known as Ivan Vasilievich, but you don't know who that is. And by you,
never
I mean
heard of him.
Everyone else doesn't know.
Wouldn't know a thing.
You know him as Ivan the Terrible.
Oh, my guy.
Yeah, so we already know what's going to happen. You don't get a nickname like that because you're a neat guy like Riley's husband who likes hanging chads. So
he doesn't. I thought he would. Okay, can I just a quick aside on nicknames? I'm sorry. Yeah. I was at a wedding this weekend, and the groom had a friend from college that I've just been hearing about. His nickname is Dirty Mike, and I just heard he has huge red curly hair. And, I spotted Dirty Mike immediately. When you have a nickname like Dirty Mike, I'm expecting you to show up and show out at a wedding.
Right.
He was giving us nothing, to the point where I had to go over. I'm sober. I can't drink right now. So sober, I had to ask Dirty Mike how he got his nickname. And he was like, I don't know. That's all I got from Dirty Mike all night. So I hope Ivan can live up to the terrible more than Mike lived up to the dirty.
Dirty Mike is getting his name revoked, I think. He's not deserving.
Someone called him OxyClean Mike after that interaction. And I think that's true.
That sounds more accurate. No, I promise that Ivan lived up to his name because, spoiler alert, he murdered his own son. So if you weren't interested, get interested. Okay.
I don't think we've had that's not fratricide. What is that? It's not patricide either.
It's nepicide, nepo baby.
Path of a nepo baby.
Yeah. Think about that.
I wish someone had done that to Johnny Depp's daughter before she made that HBO show, The Weekend.
Oh, no one watched it. I hope you didn't watch it.
I did not watch it.
All I saw was clips of Abel, or whatever his real name is.
God.
He doesn't deserve his real name after the clips I've seen online of that show. So
anyways, we had the slaying of a nepo baby. That's a new one.
The slaying of a nepo baby, yes. But we're going to go back before. So we started with the end. We're going to go back before to tell you how Ivan got so terrible, because that's not how he started. His given name was not terrible, although that joke was. So let's go back. We're going back to, again, Russia, where Ivan was the empire's first czar. But before him was his grandfather, Ivan the Great. So
what a brutal fall off.
I mean, how do you follow that? Ivan the extra great, the super great, like he was doomed from the beginning. His grandfather was the Grand Prince of Moscow for 50 years. So before there was the Tsar, there was the Grand Prince. That was kind of the equivalent. So his grandfather died. Then, unfortunately, his father died. Ivan's father died when he was only 3 years old. And so he inherited the throne as a baby. And his mother became regent until he was old enough to take the throne. And then, unfortunately, his mother died 5 years later. So this is important not only because he was young and his mother died, but Ivan was convinced that she had been poisoned by a group called the Boyars. So this is a group of men from the old aristocratic families. They were supposed to be loyal to the ruler. But again, Ivan thought that they poisoned his mother. So he distrusted that group really for the rest of his life, which was unfortunate because they held a lot of power and influence, and they should have been aligned. So Ivan was caught up in a lot of this political intrigue until he was 17 and he was old enough to rule. And then in 1547, he was crowned Tsar. So this Tsar, it's derived from the word Caesar, like our friend Caligula, like Julius Caesar. We did an podcast episode on Caligula. It means emperor. So he was
actually, I was going to say this. The beginning of his life reminds me quite a bit of Caligula in terms of like the childhood trauma. And then didn't Caligula think that someone had poisoned like someone in his family? Maybe his mom.
Yes. So if you want to learn more about that, we won't spoil it for you. Go listen to the episode.
It's very saucy.
That was one of my favorite stories personally. But so that same year he became Tsar. He marries a woman named Anastasia Romanovna. Sound familiar? It's all coming back full circle. She was the great aunt of the future first Tsar of the Romanov dynasty, who was Michael I. So it's all in that same lineage. Obviously, we know the name Anastasia from Anastasia and the Romanovs and what happened with them. But we can start to see kind of that thread of how they're all connected. Ivan and Anastasia had 2 children. Ivan was the oldest. We'll call him Ivan Jr. And then Fyodor was their second son. So the stage is set. He's got his family. He's got his 2 sons. Should be all good because he's got the heir and the spare. And he's got the power. Like we talked about, they had some feuds with the group that really should have been allied with him. And I'm not going to go into the medieval politics of Russia because we don't have 4 hours on this podcast and no one wants to hear that. So if you're like listening or watching this and saying like, what about this? And what about this? And you like really love the history of medieval Russian politics.
You're probably a woman.
Yeah, you're probably a woman. And honestly, I'm sorry, this is not the podcast for you because we've got things to talk about. And it's not this. So we're at a very high level. What was everyone fighting about all the time? Mostly the same thing people always fight about, which was access to land. So at that time, bodies of water and control over the land, that was equal to power. Because there's no cars, there's no trains, there's no airplanes. You have to travel 2 ways, by foot and horseback, or by boat. And so in the 1550s, Ivan had a series of military campaigns. They were focused on a group called the Tatars, who lived in territories called Khanates. So all these words that you won't remember, but you can find this group of people in Uzbekistan, Bulgaria, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. And really, it comes down to that he was heavily focused on conquering these lands throughout his rule. They were very costly, obviously. And when he would win a campaign, he would build a building. One of the most famous is the iconic church, St. Basil. And I bring that up because the legend goes that he wanted it to be like one of the most beautiful things that ever existed, and nothing would ever compare. So he blinded the architect who built it so that the architect could never build anything like it again. So,
oh my gosh,
I don't know that story is necessarily true. There's not a ton of proof, but it kind of goes to the lore of Ivan's reputation at this point. He was starting to earn that terrible part of his name. And what was even worse was that he's going through all these campaigns. He has all these wars. And in the end, he didn't really have anything to show for it. He has to continue to return the land. And it becomes a major source of strife between him and his son about like how much they should be involved now outside their territory, and how much these conflicts are worth in the end. Around this time, Ivan's wife sadly dies, and not surprisingly, he's also convinced that she was poisoned by the boyars, so the same group that killed his mother. And again, we don't know if it's true. What's important is how he reacted to it. So he withdraws from society. He leaves Moscow. He threatens to abdicate, which isn't great because his son is only 6 at this time. So not a great time to abdicate. So he agrees eventually not to abdicate if the boyars are removed from power. And he creates an entire new court called the Oprichnina. In 1565, he takes the boyars' land. He redistributes it to his new court. Obviously, that went over really well because these families have been there for hundreds of years. And so this is where, again, he's building that reputation because his new court was less like a court and more like a military. It was basically there to use force and terror to remove his enemies. And along the way, they unfortunately sacrificed a lot of innocents. The most notorious example of that is in 1570 in Novgorod, one of Russia's biggest cities at the time. So Ivan was convinced that this city was against him. He sends his Oprichniki in there.
We're just going to pretend all of these pronunciations are kosher.
Oprichniki, that definitely is how you say it. That's like the slang word for his
group of people. Sounds like a Greek dip.
Yeah, sounds tasty. What they did was not tasty and not a joke. They killed somewhere between 10,000 to 100,000 people. That is a very large difference. Obviously, there weren't a lot of journalists.
When they tell you that they'll show up between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. to fix your dishwasher.
Yeah, they'll be there. You just don't know when.
Yeah.
A lot of people died. We just don't know how many. It was thousands. So Ivan, he's mourning the loss of his wife. He's left town. He's got his lackeys just kind of raising havoc. But he did find the time to marry 5 more times over the course of the next 10 years. So trying to fill that void. each time his wife died, his paranoia grew. And unfortunately, none of those marriages produced any more children. So at this point, he still has his 2 sons. Ivan Jr. is still the heir.
So all the wives died.
All
None
the
of
wives
them
died.
were like divorced or off with their head.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But I don't think I read anything or seen anything about like suspecting that he murdered them.
Right.
So
yeah, I won't put that on him.
We won't put it on him, although we could, because he clearly murdered a lot of other people, including his son. In 1581, he did murder his son, Ivan Jr. He hit Ivan over the head in a fit of rage. I guess it was like a really hard hit because it killed him. And it's kind of unclear, like, how did he get so angry that he was willing to kill his oldest son and heir? And there's 2 theories. There's one that is more political, kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. They disagreed on policies towards other countries in the current wars, and that caused a lot of tension. The other one is more significant, which is that Ivan, the elder, his father, had reportedly beaten Ivan Jr.'s pregnant wife, who then miscarried. So not surprising that would also create tension.
Yikes.
So at this point, we can see he's got his violent nature. He's got his people that are out doing who knows what. And Ivan actually dies 2 years later after he kills his son. So he didn't live much longer, and in those 2 years, he just continued to increase in paranoia and his health decreasing, obviously, because he passed away. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it meant, the fact that he killed his oldest son, even though he had another son, and it ended up not being a great long-term plan. But
never is.
It never is. Can't recommend. We want to talk about like what was possibly going on with Ivan. What you've read about like his reputation, some of the theories that may have kind of led to this kind of violent nature and this increase in paranoia.
Okay, before we do that, I do have one question for you. Do we have any information at all about how he reacted to murdering his son? Like, was he remorseful? Was he surprised? Was he embarrassed?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think back on all the things that I read, and I honestly can't remember anything of him being remorseful at this point in his life. I can definitely confirm that, but it didn't really sound like he was in a place to take responsibility for his actions.
Classic. Yeah, Classic. So we can talk about what might have been going on with Ivan. I think it's interesting. We've talked about before, I think people want kind of a biological explanation a lot of times in these cases, because we don't want to believe that a person is just like naturally inclined to such violence and like horrible acts.
Right.
So along those lines,
Right.
there have kind of been a lot of theories proposed for what was going on with Ivan. The one that I was familiar with before I started my research was that he was, sleeping around and caught syphilis. And there are cases in which syphilis.
That's my favorite theory. I'm sorry.
That's your favorite theory?
Just in any of our historical subjects.
Oh, you just love the idea of syphilis causing insanity.
I just love, yeah, exactly. Because it's just like, hey, guess what? You were a man whore, and now look what you did.
All right. So, spoiler alert, I don't think that Ivan actually had neurosyphilis. We'll get into why. I think another classic explanation, which I touched on when I was saying that this reminded me of our story with Caligula, is that he had a traumatic childhood. He lost his father early. He thought his mom was murdered, etc.
Lost his wife. I guess that was later, but still.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of things going on. But overall, there's kind of a lack of information and a lack of primary sources, which I'm sure you ran into. And something that I came across again and again when I was reading papers about Ivan was this autopsy that was conducted in the 1960s, actually. So I guess his body was so well preserved that a doctor was able to take a look and do an examination in the 1960s, which is pretty amazing.
Wow.
The problem with this is that the autopsy report is both in German and behind a paywall. And due to the fact that endorsements are not flowing into this podcast,
You didn't want to pay for this information?
$20 could not go towards
I'm
this.
on the edge of my seat.
Well, so I was intrigued because based on this one autopsy, I saw people claim that Ivan was schizophrenic or a psychopath because they didn't find anything. And then other people said that he was poisoned. And other people said, oh, they did find evidence of a syphilis infection. So I was just really trying to find someone who wrote about the autopsy that I could trust. And I found something by a scholar named Edward Keenan, who has written a lot of papers on Ivan. And I trust him because he actually has debunked a lot of myths about Ivan the Terrible.
We trust Edward.
We do. He's a real one. Specifically, he proved that a lot of letters that were used to paint Ivan in an unflattering light were actually faked.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It happened back then.
Can never trust big academia, let me tell you. Yeah.
Not now, not then.
Not then. So he was a historian at Harvard at the time, and I started reading his interpretation of the autopsy. So if his translation and observations can be trusted, then there was no evidence of syphilis. But there was something super interesting, which was extensive skeletal abnormalities. So I leans
what
in.
What does that mean?
I'm going to actually just read kind of a long quote, but I think it's pretty interesting. So he said that his quote, right clavicle was abnormally shorter than the left, and the left clavicle was larger and more massive than the right. The whole torso was noticeably asymmetrical. The spine with its straight neck had lost flexibility as a result of the formation of numerous osteophytes. The whole spine was as if welded in a single position. The osteophytes on the vertebrae had fused. Around the joints of the large bones of the extremities were found ridge-shaped and lump-shaped growths. Okay, my first question was, what the heck is an osteophyte? So it's a bone spur.
Oh,
which, they're like outgrowths of bone near joints. Often it happens in like arthritis.
Right.
But what was really odd to me was the information about his clavicles being different sizes.
Right.
Because that suggests a developmental issue. Like one bone developed at a different rate than the other, because at some point adults' bones stopped growing. So this didn't like happen when he was an adult. So I really wanted to understand like what was happening with his bones, and did they have anything to do with his moods and his state of mind? And thankfully Keenan was interested in the same thing. So he found a series, or he didn't find them, but he links the observations of the autopsy to a series of letters that were exchanged between Ivan's mother and father right after his birth. And these are really rare. We don't have a lot of records from his early life. So the letters say that Ivan was having convulsions and that like a large lump was on his neck and then the lump, this is kind of gross, but it like ruptured and started like blood and pus came out. Unpleasant. And they referred to this as maca, M-A-K-A, in the letter. And Keenan wasn't the first one to look at this letter. Like, historians were trying to translate maca and they found nothing.
Okay.
But Keenan is just maybe a little smarter because he
That's our
was
boy.
able to link it indirectly by realizing that maca is related to a word from Russian,
Right.
or a dialect of Russian that means a hump of soil near a marsh. And then that word, I know it's gross, that word is actually related to the Russian word for tuberculosis.
Oh.
Yes. So this actually
So
makes
he
a
had the
lot of
tubie?
sense. He had the tubes.
The tube.
Um,
He's lucky to
I'm
be
not going to
alive.
go too much into tuberculosis. If you're interested, there's a podcast called This Podcast Will Kill You, and they go over like different infectious diseases. It's excellent. And they go over like the history of tuberculosis and what causes it. But it is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So it's a bacterial disease. And like, obviously, we have vaccines for it today. So it's not very common. But when Ivan was alive, it was alive and well.
Yeah, rampant.
And yeah, it generally affects the lungs, but it can spread to lymph nodes in the like head and neck area, as well as joints, bones, and abdomen. And when it does infect those lymph nodes in the neck, it has been known to produce growths like the one that Ivan's parents described in the letter.
The one that exploded.
Yeah, the one that secreted all sorts of
With
delicious
the
juices.
marshy. Yes.
The marshy
Yeah.
hump,
Lovely.
or the hump
Yeah.
near a marsh. This form of tuberculosis actually has a name, which is also gross. It's called scrofula, and it is more common in children. A bit of irony is that actually, in up until the 1800s, people thought that scrofula could be cured by being touched by a king. So, a little ironic that
Yes.
scrofula was not cured by
Thanks
that.
for nothing.
Yeah. And like I said, tuberculosis normally affects the lungs, but it can affect the spine or the skeleton. And when it does, the spine is the area that's most commonly affected. Spinal TB is also more common in children. And it can have long-lasting effects. So neurological symptoms do happen because the spinal cord itself becomes deformed and compressed, much like was observed in the autopsy. This isn't like a common outcome of tuberculosis, but I think it's pretty plausible. And given all of the doubt that's been cast on the syphilis theory, no offense,
Right.
let's kind of just roll with this. And I will
We're rolling with
propose
the tubie.
Yeah, we're going with the tubes, and I'm going to maybe go a little bit out there and go one step further than Keenan did to suggest what the heck this had to do with his mind. So as you can imagine, having a deformed skeleton, pretty painful. So he was likely living with this chronic pain. And this is somewhat confirmed by sources. So people have described that he enjoyed the more than occasional drink, and that he used ointments, specifically those made with mercury. We don't really have mercury in many things anymore. I remember like growing up when you had a thermometer, like the biggest fear in the world was that you were going to break it, and like you thought everyone was going to die immediately. Like people just instilled that into you. But that was not the case.
This guy was rubbing it all over him.
So, and it wasn't just him, because mercury was like used not just as a poison at the time. Like people knew it was poisonous, but they thought, oh, if you use it in like small levels, it could be really healthy and good for you on your skin. Actually, something alarming I found too is that in countries where products are not as closely regulated, mercury is still in things. So there was I think it was 2021, the CDC issued a warning because a woman had traveled overseas and then got back and was using a lotion and she got mercury poisoning. So just be careful with your beauty products. Just stick to Road Beauty. Please sponsor us.
Yes,
yep.
exactly.
So
don't spray.
And the reason I bring up this mercury theory is that mercury does affect the brain. This is well documented. So many toxins don't get into the brain because there's something called the blood-brain barrier, which is a barricade formed by cells that protects the brain from insults, make sure good stuff gets in, bad stuff stays out. But mercury just goes right on through. And then once it's in the brain, it gets converted to a very stable form so it can just stick around. And then it has a variety of effects in the brain. So it can bind to microtubules, which I think we talked about in the Henry VIII episode, but they're basically like the structural support for your cells. They can also affect neuronal signaling by altering the release of neurotransmitters or their receptor activity. And then it promotes the formation of reactive oxygen species, which are these special forms of oxygen-free radicals that can interact with and damage DNA. So overall, the effect of mercury in the brain is that it can induce neuronal death. If you check out our blog post from this series, there's actually a cool video of some neurons in a dish being treated with mercury, and you can watch them die in real time. So, okay, so we know it affects the brain. Ooh, a little demo. But how does this relate to the symptoms that we see in Ivan?
Right.
So your symptoms can vary depending on like the extent of the exposure, but often irritability, apathy, anxiety, cognitive impairment, withdrawing from society, and depression. So a lot of the things that Ivan was experiencing. And then there's a severe form that's called Mad Hatter's disease because it was discovered in like a hat factory where people were exposed to mercury. But this one is the one that I think is most similar to what Ivan was experiencing, and that it causes mood instability, tantrums, and fighting. So it's pretty
The
weird
ultimate
if you think
tantrum,
in
killing
total
your
about
son.
like, yeah, killing your son, beating his pregnant wife. These are all classic hallmarks of Mad Hatter's disease. I think that, but this fits too with like his poor decision making in terms of like the cost of military expeditions, obviously the rage, and then him like moving out of Moscow and being a little bit isolated. There have been studies of whether I should say mercury was found in Ivan's remains. However, there's debate as to whether they were consistent with poisoning. I think that's really hard to do. Like his body was examined like in the 1960s, so
yeah, hundreds of years after he died.
There's a lot of things that could explain why the levels are off. But I think there's enough similarities between his behavior and what's described in the literature to warrant consideration of this theory, at least.
So then the theory would be that he had tuberculosis as a child. It created these like deformities in his skeleton and his spine, which caused pain, which led him to use medicines that contained mercury, which then led to the neurological effects.
Exactly.
Did I track?
Yes. So really, if Ivan had just invested in a masseuse, or, if he could have gone to the local CVS and buy some Icy Hot, then
not gotten sick.
Then, yeah, that too. Maybe get a vaccine. Ever heard of it, Ivan? Then you wouldn't have killed your son.
Yeah. Ever heard of one?
Yeah, so if you don't want to kill your son,
you wouldn't have killed
please
your
get
son,
vaccinated.
and history. Oh no, we can't make that claim. That is, that's our medical recommendation as people who are not licensed in any
Yes.
way, shape, or
None.
form. Yes, he should have just not gotten sick in the first place or done anything else, because
Yoga.
the downfall of his decision was not great. Yeah, yoga is nice, although actually yoga hurts my knees, so can't
Oh gosh.
recommend. Don't recommend. Actually makes me angrier, so it doesn't sound like he should have done it either. But yes, as Riley explained through her theory, which I happen to enjoy, even though it's not the syphilis one, we'll pick someone else one day for that one. But he murdered his son. He died 2 years later. I guess on the surface, fortunately, he had another son, Fyodor. Unfortunately, there was a reason why no one wanted Fyodor to be in charge, other than the fact that, he wasn't the oldest, which was that he was often very sick and he was dumb. And those are not my words. Those are the words of everyone who ever wrote about him, and also his parents. So
it's tough combo.
Yeah, it's a tough combo, especially when you are supposed to be the czar of a very powerful country and your family has been ruling in some capacity for 700 years before you. So there was a lot of pressure on this very sickly kid who didn't want to be there, and no one wanted him there. So the stage was set for success, obviously. He didn't want to be the czar, so he let his brother-in-law, Boris, make all of the decisions for him, which might have been a good idea. And so Fyodor was czar, and I say that in quotes because he didn't really act as czar. Boris did, for 14 years. He died at 41 with no children, and so he dies, and there's no one left to take over. So Boris is actually elected the czar, since really he'd been effectively ruling as one anyway. But that instability that Ivan the Terrible had started during his rule is still burning. The people that he kicked out, obviously, we're not going to forget that, because they were very old and very powerful and rich, or they were at least before he took all of their land. So when Boris was crowned, Boris was still as paranoid as Ivan was about that group of nobility's loyalty. And so he dealt with the same kind of issues that Ivan did. And then Boris died in 1605, and then his son, also named Fyodor II. I don't know why you would name your son that if everyone hated the first one.
Yeah,
but
that's
anyway.
Do they make Borises anymore?
So they don't make Borises anymore, do they? I didn't even know they made Borises back then, to be honest. So
yeah, I just thought it was
good
like
for
a
him.
product of like Soviet Russia. I thought like Borises were only during the Red Scare.
Well, maybe there's this one Boris, and then not ever again for hundreds of years.
And then just only like in the 80s.
Because it didn't. Yeah, because it didn't really end well for this Boris, and it didn't end well for his son and his son's mother, who were murdered by dissenters.
Classic Russia.
People who didn't like that they. So now we're starting to see the Russia that we all know and love, just
You can't
wanting
change
murder. You can't change them. And so now we've got this period called the Times of Trouble, and Russia is struggling to find stability. They're trying to find a leader. Again, Ivan's kind of lineage has died out, and then Boris's lineage is murdered. And so finally in 1613, they find stability. They name Michael Romanov to be the first czar of the Romanov dynasty. And we know that they ruled for many hundreds of years. It unfortunately did not end well for them either. But they had a lot of success in the interim. And so for me, it's just like, it's fascinating because I'm getting really into it now. It's fascinating because if Ivan hadn't killed his oldest son in this fit of rage or whatever drama was happening, this family drama, whether it was fueled by mercury poisoning or whether Ivan was just a DB, that's what my mom says when she doesn't want to say like the real word.
Yeah, we got to keep it clean for YouTube.
Fill in the blanks. Yeah. So whatever the reason was, like, he kills his oldest son, his second son is worthless and doesn't have kids, and their 700-year-old reign dies out. But if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have gotten the Romanovs, or at least not at that period. Like, we don't know what would have happened down the line. And so we got one of the most famous ruling families in history, and then Russia emerges as one of the world's major powerhouses. So it's fascinating to me that one instance led to such a shift in history. And yes, there was this like period of instability between when Ivan died and when Michael took the throne, but then it ultimately led to hundreds of years of Russia kind of building the power that they have today. So now I'm finished. My soapbox is finished.
I was just going to add that is, what we are all about at this show, is trying to link, neurological or mental health issues and how that changes the course of history. So like you said, if it wasn't for Ivan and whatever might have been, then that would have changed all of the course of Russian history, but like worldwide too, and who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think it's fascinating too that you can dig up a body that's 400 years old and perform an autopsy on however accurate it is, but the information you can find out. So I
if
say
any
you
of
pay
our
$20
listeners
for that.
are fluent German speakers and have $20, hit me up and we will really get to the bottom of this.
We'll talk. Yeah, absolutely. On our last episode, just in closing, you had proposed the question of who would be the royal couple of America. And we talked about how, like, many people think it's Beyonce and Jay-Z, or really just Beyonce. I don't really feel like people care about Jay-Z anymore. So sorry if that's controversial too. But now, unless you live under a rock, I can't get anything on Twitter that doesn't have to do with Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. And it's really ruining football for me as an avid football watcher. I can't even turn on football anymore without hearing about it.
It is ruining.
But all that is to say is everything. They are not my royal couple. Everything.
I could not agree.
Although I will say the videos,
today,
another TikTok trend that I find. I was going to say another TikTok trend that I find hilarious is the girlfriends that are recording their boyfriends and them saying like, oh, so glad that Taylor Swift put Travis Kelce on the map, and then them losing their minds about how everyone knew who he was or he's a future Hall of Famer. I do enjoy
so
that.
Funny. Yeah, the memes are definitely good. I like the seemingly ranch moment that Heinz is having. I do not like.
That's just like, I don't know how
personally,
bored America is.
It is my nightmare that Taylor Swift and Brittany Mahomes would be friends. And today TMZ reported that they really hit it off at the after party and were taking shots together, which 100% Brittany leaked that herself. But that is what I need to not happen.
I saw that tweet before we got on here, and I was like, this is really the end, because that just speaks volumes about Taylor Swift, because that woman is probably one of the last people that I'd want to hang out with. Personal opinion. Don't know her, but I know enough.
I have a lot of questions. Like, had they hung out before in person, or was their first hangout like with the entirety of the Kansas City Chiefs? Like, It makes no sense. She's going to MetLife Stadium this weekend, which is one of the saddest places you can go as a human in America. And I'm just confused. I'll say that I like seeing her.
That's her second and last football game, I can guarantee you.
Yeah, after she sees that parking lot, no thank you. I do enjoy seeing her supporting her mans out here. I feel like everything is always about her. And she was never like hyping up whoever she was dating. So that's kind of refreshing. I just wish it wasn't someone as annoying as Travis Kelce.
I agree with I like the change of guy. I'm here for an athlete. I'm here for someone who's more high profile because her last boyfriend didn't talk about her. And then the guy from 1975 was just disgusting in so many ways. So I'm here for that. But I don't believe for a second that they are romantically interested in each other. At least I don't think she's interested in him. No. I think it's a big publicity stunt, which is fine. I get it. Like, just say it if you are. I read someone that works. I have something on Twitter. Someone who works for a company that works with the NFL, and they really want to get women more involved, and so they think it's this whole thing to get women into sports. Mm-hmm. All I know is Kris Jenner is very upset because she went through a lot to get Kylie and Timothée Chalamet at the U.S. Open tennis tournament, and now no one cares. So
no one cares.
She's devastated.
The thing that's so funny to me is that Taylor Swift is the richest woman that I can imagine, and the NFL offered her the halftime show, and she said, "I don't do unpaid work." However, when they ostensibly paid her to date Travis Kelce and eat chicken with ranch in a box, she was like, "Yeah, come sign me in."
I mean, this is the only time I'll defend her. If someone paid me to do that, I would also do it. And I might even do it for free. Date Travis Kelce, get box tickets, NFL, get free chicken fingers with ketchup and seemingly ranch. And,
But remember, you have to go to MetLife Stadium for a primetime game.
No, I didn't sign up for the second game. I didn't
sign up just one game deal. A one game deal.
One game. Just a one game deal. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I quit Rush in college because I had to watch the Patriots beat up on the Jets. So,
is that why you quit?
Going out of my way for the Jets. It is a true story, if anyone asks.
Okay.
I mean, it is. I was going to quit anyway, but
yeah, Mom said that you just didn't think that you were going to get picked by your top choice, so you dropped out. Yeah, that's what it was told to us at home.
Snap.
Just like when she told me that you got mono from sharing a bathroom with so many girls at college.
Yeah, no. I got mono because someone sneezed in my face. Obviously, in college, that's how you get mono. Tracy's a hater. She was called. That's the worst call out ever. No, I quit because I rushed my second year, which you shouldn't do. No one does. And then by that time, all of my friends were in sororities and fraternities anyway. So I was already going to all the parties and doing all that stuff. It was why do I need to now join and pay for all the unfun stuff? So
you weren't going to get picked by your top choice, is what it sounds like to me.
My top choice wasn't available. Okay. They were unavailable that day. It's nice. Thank you. All right. Well,
but you had the Patriots versus Jets as your cover, so you made it out fine.
Exactly. 6 Super Bowls later, and I'm feeling good. Ivan the Terrible. This episode was not terrible. So thank you.
Very true.
I think we're done.
Okay.
You're done.
You're done.
Bye.
Bye.